Hi, my name is Daniel Shaw, and I've been asked to say a few words for a few reasons. First of all, I'm lucky enough to be married to Isa Catto, and so Jessica Catto was my mother-in-law. And second of all, I'm lucky enough to count Sanjayan as a dear friend. And I just want to thank everyone on behalf of the Catto family for coming tonight. This was a way we wanted to honor Isa's mother, and it's just great to see everyone turn out the way they have, not just tonight, but in the past, and hope you all will in the future. And I want to thank Sanjayan for coming to do this, taking a break out of adding to an inhuman or maybe an inhumane schedule is the best way to put it. I think just looking at his passport can induce severe jet lag in pretty much anybody. It's astonishing. And most of all, I wanted to thank ACES for giving this lecture series the best possible home we could ever have imagined. And I want to thank Tom Cardamone for embracing the concept, and Olivia Siegel for doing all the legwork and putting these together. It's a lot of work. And most of all, Chris Lane for incorporating this into his vision for ACES going forward in the future. And we're lucky to have ACES in our community. And again, thank you for coming. And Chris Lane, where are you?
Thank you, Daniel, very much. Isa, where are you? Thank you as well. And thank you, Jessica Catto, for your generosity, but for your vision in creating the Jessica Catto Leadership Dialogues. Thank you all for coming tonight. I was driving through the beautiful town of Somerset, Colorado, assume everybody's done that, with my son, my 5-year-old son, and he looked at a 200-foot mound of coal, and he said to me, he said, "Papa, that's the black rock that when you burn it, it makes electricity and pollutes our air." And I thought, wow, he's 5. I think I learned that in college. And he didn't quite make the connection to climate change, but the epiphany I had, being here a year as the CEO of ACES, was that's a product of ACES. That's a boy that's been through ACES, that is becoming ecologically literate. Yeah, and then I thought, well, what if all the leaders and doers and thinkers and decision makers of the world, what if they had at least a modicum of environmental science? What if they were ecologically literate? What decisions would they make, and how would they be different? How would our world be different? And I thought, well, ACES is trying to do this work. And if you haven't heard the ACES stump speech in a while, we're 4 sites. We're teaching ecological literacy, sustainable agriculture, forest health, 100,000 education contacts per year. We're doing it at the iconic locations of Aspen, that's Ashcroft and Maroon Bells, as far down as the Mid-Valley, on top of the area ski resorts. We're doing it in partnership with 42 schools up and down the valley. We are full-time in 2 schools, Aspen and Basalt, so that's teachers, some of the best minds from some of the best universities teaching youth environmental science, what they're not getting in the school, in our schools. And on our 45th year anniversary, which is this year, and I'll look at Tom and Jody, I think of you guys when I think of 45 years of ACES that made this happen. And I announce, and you guys are the first, and this is a big deal to ACES, you're the first to hear this, that we have expanded our school program to Carbondale, full-time, year-round, starting this fall. So that's a big deal for us. That's 500 more kids that are getting environmental science education that weren't before. So look out, world, because Sanjayan, who's going to talk to us tonight, we're going to be producing hundreds of Sanjayans in the future coming out of Carbondale, Colorado. I'm not joking. So we have a special guest tonight. He's traveled every inch of this earth, and he's here in Aspen tonight, Dr. M. Sanjayan, the lead scientist for the Nature Conservancy. and CBS News environmental correspondent. And when I read that, I thought, who hasn't dreamed of wanting that job? He gets to go on national television and tell the world, about as cool as it gets. He's a leading ecologist, speaker, writer, and Emmy-nominated news contributor. His story on the Ivory Wars in Africa was nominated for an Emmy in 2013 for outstanding investigative journalism. He's done work on climate change, the forest fires in the West, marine debris, and I know Lori and John McBride are here tonight. Pete is not here with us, but I know a place in Kenya that is very near and dear to your heart, Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. That is a 62,000-acre preserve 100 miles northwest of Kenya. And I know you guys were integral in creating and saving that. And Sanjayan and the Nature Conservancy invested $30 million, their biggest investment in Africa, to create this preserve. Job well done. Sanjayan holds a doctorate from the University of California, Santa Cruz. He's a Catto Fellow at the Aspen Institute. He's an advisor on the Clinton Global Initiative. He hops around the globe and educates audiences on the exotic places that need protection. And you guys have probably seen him on NBC Nightly News, CNN, Fox, the two coolest shows in the world, Discovery Channel. Shark Week. Do we all love Shark Week? You stop everything when Shark Week starts. And the most beautiful, and if you haven't seen this, you guys, Planet Earth. I think everybody's heard of Planet Earth, the most beautiful cinematography ever done. Sanjayan's done that. When he's not fending off elephants, hanging with Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, or the Dalai Lama, he is verbally sparring with David Letterman. Try that one. You should Google the David Letterman Sanjayan talk. And he's been told and introduced before as the guy that has the best job in the world. And I'm going to reintroduce you, Sanjayan, as the guy that has the best job in the world. Sanjayan, welcome.
Thank you. Wow. After that, you might as well just go home. It's only going to get, this is the best I can ever be right before I give my talk, after that kind of introduction. So it's just downhill from now. Thank you, Chris, so much. And thanks to ACES for having me here. And obviously, Daniel Shaw and Catto for their generosity in hosting me. I also just very quickly want to mention that there's a couple of colleagues from the Nature Conservancy in Colorado who are here. And I wouldn't mind if they just put their hands up just for a second here. Chris Pegg, Christina. Do you want to stand up? Just so, because no one can see you from back there. And then Tim Sullivan, who's our state director. If anything I say offends you, these are the people you should talk to. I will be at a bar somewhere. Okay. So I'm supposed to stay in the light because they're filming some of this, but they're never going to get the exposure right anyway because I'm brown. Most cameras are set up for white people. This is just simple truth. Okay. So I was born on an island. I was born in Sri Lanka. And when I was born, these are stilt fishermen in Sri Lanka, and when I was born literally a stone's throw from the ocean. My grandmother, who was the matriarch of the family, took a look at my head, and there they read your hair patterns on your head, like we read our palms, and took me to the astrologer and shoved my head at this astrologer, the most famous astrologer apparently in Sri Lanka, who looked at my head and gave my grandmother the news. She comes back breathless and announces to the family that the son would die by drowning. So I was basically prevented from going into the ocean. That was I could see the ocean from there. Notice the artful placement of hands there. But that was me. Like, I was trapped. I could see the ocean, but I was never allowed to get in it. And that's the way it was for me until I was about 9 years old. And when I was 9 years old, well, a little bit before that, my parents moved to Africa. And my mother broke with convention and taught me how to swim. Now, that's a pretty big deal, because if you just think about it, if you know you're going to die, or your kid's going to die by drowning, keeping them out of the water is actually a pretty rational strategy, right? Keep that, you don't drown, you don't go in the water. But she didn't. She broke with it. She did something really unexpected, and to some extent contrary. And it set me off. It set me off on a completely new journey where, I get to do stuff like this. Is actually for Shark Week. but not the most recent one, like about 4 years ago, off the north coast of Australia. And we are catching sharks the old-fashioned way, which is sneaking up to them very quietly and putting a rope around their tail. And then you hang on to it. One shark is fine, but when you've got like 2 or 3, then you're playing tug of war about who's going to take you down. But it just changed my life. And I tell you this story because if I went around this room and I asked all of you, if you knew that you would die by drowning, would you want to learn how to swim? And I bet you nearly all of you, if not all of you, would say, absolutely. I want to learn how to swim, or give the kid a fighting chance. And to some extent, that's exactly where we are with the environmental movement. The death of the planet has been foretold. We're in Aspen. You can just stay in these seats, and eventually someone will come and say that, and another person will say that, and another person will say that. So that's not no news. The question really is, what do we want to do about it, right? So the death of the environment has been foretold. What do we want to do about it? Do we want to sink, or do we want a fighting chance? Now, as a scientist, as a lover of nature, as a conservationist, and I grew up in Africa, literally had chimpanzees behind my house. It was really quite an amazing childhood. This is the way I picture the world, sort of green and brown and pastels and blue. This is the way a lot of you think of the world, too, the state of the natural world. But it really isn't like this. And if you map on top of this map all the different hurts that we have done to the planet, from deep-sea trawling to habitat degradation to development to draining rivers to damming up rivers and so on and so forth, it really kind of looks like this. This is published in the paper, and I don't need to go into it. But this is the world we really live in. This is the Anthropocene, the age of man. We've left the Holocene, the last age, and we're in a new age. And what's amazing about this age is that basically since life began, really, 600 million years ago, there's this thing called cyanobacteria, and it really altered the chemistry of the planet. From that creature onwards, nothing has actually altered the chemistry of the planet the way we're doing. So cyanobacteria and humans were the only 2 species who've fundamentally changed every part of this planet. And so this is the planet we live in, and this is the planet that your kids, your grandkids are going to inherit. We know this, and the question again is, now, what do we want to do about it? And this planet, which we use really pretty much completely, still has the power to reach out and bite us. So it's not that we used all this planet up, and guess what? Now we're all living great, wonderful, happy lives. Not really. You got at least 1 billion people at risk from what this guy has just been dealing with in Bangladesh. So yeah, we used up the planet, but it hasn't even given us the rewards that we thought it would. And then for folks like myself, it puts iconic species like this at grave risk. So this is probably one of the rarest, this is the rarest mammal on the planet. This is the northern white rhino. And there are only, in the entire world, 8 northern white rhinos. 4 of them are in zoos, 2 in the Czech Republic, 2 in the San Diego Zoo. They're too old to breed. There are 4 in Africa. This is one of them, actually in a place very close to Lewa. Now, if you go to visit this rhino, and many celebrities have gone to visit it, what you will see is you'll see this rhino, and it's kind of amazing. This guy's name is Sudan, because when he was about 3 months old, he was captured in southern Sudan. That was about 30 years ago. He, if you pull the camera back, it actually looks like that, which kind of tells you the extraordinary effort that you have to go to even protect the little bits of nature that you really care about. And so if this is the future of conservation, then look, write your checks and go home because we're done, right? It's got to be better than this. Now, when I was a grad student, and I bet many of you in the audience who are into biology and wildlife, you probably feel the same way, you know, these 2 books came about. Today when I was in the ACES office, I was looking for these books. And they were really fundamental to the way we saw the world. You know, E.O. Wilson introduced this concept of biodiversity, the diversity of life. And he basically opened our eyes up, you know, the whole cohort of grad students to this notion of life as a cathedral. You know, look at this, and these towering cathedrals just bubbling with nature, bubbling with life. It was gorgeous and awesome. One thing that is missing from this, though, do you notice what's one thing that's missing from these pictures? Humans, right? So you would know this was the Anthropocene. This is still in the Holocene. But this is what people like myself, you know, wanted to save. This is what we were going to do. So 15 years ago, I came out of 10 years ago, I came out of grad school. No, 15 years ago, I came out of grad school. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to save this. And now I look at myself, and I'm sort of halfway through my career, and if I'm lucky, halfway through my life. And I ask myself, have I done enough? And the answer is absolutely no. I'm nowhere close to getting to this. Not even close. So this really depressed me, right? I'm a pretty optimistic person. You're right. If you go watch that Letterman video, you'll see that I bubble with optimism most of the time. Usually after a few drinks, but hey, who's counting? But this really, really bothered me. So about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I basically started on a journey that has now taken me quite literally around the world many, many times over. And I've gone to try to find what I've been searching for is I've been searching for an answer. And I don't really quite have it yet, or I'm starting to get the glimpses of it. And you guys are like a test audience in some ways. I'm sharing it really for the first time with an audience, and I couldn't be happier doing it here. But the quest was simple. The quest was, in a world with 7 billion people, in the Anthropocene, is there still room for wild nature? In the Anthropocene, in this age of man, where we rule supreme like the dinosaurs did, except for a much shorter time. But in this incredible age, does nature still matter to our lives? Does it really have, do wild animals still have an impact on us? And what shocked me about this journey was, the answer was resoundingly, yes, they do. So now I don't travel alone when I go around the world, mostly because, well, I don't have the money to do that. But I am good at convincing camera crews to come along with me. So in this case, I had an entire crew from PBS and National Geographic coming along on this journey with me. And the big show will come out in 2015. Hopefully, you'll get advertised very heavily. Hopefully, I'll come and premiere part of it here. But today, I'm going to show you 3 stories that we uncovered as part of that journey. And I got to ask you guys in the audience, it'd be really kind of you not to take any pictures that I'm showing you from now on out till the end, just because you know, production companies spend millions of dollars to keep this stuff secret. And I'm assuming no one here works for Discovery. Right. Okay. If you do, leave now. No. All right, so the first story I think, but I'll explain the story to you and sort of lay it out once you, obviously the narration will not be done with a British accent. It'll be done by me. But you sort of get the sense of it and how we sort of lay it out and try to make it exciting and interesting, but don't pull any punches either on the other end. So what's the real story? We didn't tell you the punchline because the bits are being filled in. But what happened is, you know, India has 8 species of vultures. Most of them belong to the genus Gyps. And this is one of them, white-backed vulture, for example, or Himalayan griffon. And what happened was that in the 80s, a drug was introduced into the veterinary service called Diclofenac. And Diclofenac is actually prescribed for people, even in the United States sometimes. And Diclofenac is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And it basically eases the aches and pains of working animals, like camels and cows and horses and things like that, particularly cows, which are sacred in India and used mostly for working and milk and not for eating. Diclofenac, it turns out, and that scientist actually figured this out. It was actually a Pakistani researcher who figured this out, is absolutely deadly to vultures. And when I say deadly, it's like cyanide to humans. A single dose, and they're dead. A single minute dose, dead. And vultures, when they die, they don't really just fall out of the sky. They go hide themselves. They die. They're cryptic. So no one realized that 20 million vultures disappeared in the period of about 10 years. And the population went down to by 99.8% of some species, gone. So now, interestingly, there's a bit of a resurgence. And it caused huge problems. The Jains, for example, people who believe in sort of sky burials, they don't have a place now to dispose of human remains. They actually use a solar concentrator to burn the bodies. But bigger than that, all these dead animal carcasses, because they don't eat cows in India, just started mounting. And that one place I went to in Bikaner probably had, and I'm not kidding you, probably about 40 to 50,000 carcasses. It was unbelievable. We couldn't even show you what we saw, and probably 5,000 dogs. And it was just horrific, right? So the whole thing was quite disturbing. But now they have a drug that can replace diclofenac. Actually, they've had it for a while now, called meloxicam. Problem is people still aren't using, they're still using the old stocks that they have of diclofenac. People who are getting diclofenac for human consumption, because you go to the doctor, they're giving it to their cows. So it's still getting in the supply, but not nearly as much. And belatedly, particularly Nepal, but India as well, have now kind of realized what an enormous challenge this has become. So here you think of vulture, like who cares? Like India's got so many problems, right? Are we really going to save this ugly, maligned bird? No, right? So they think, well, let it go. And so they die. No one ever takes any notice of it. And then guess what? It comes to bite us in an absolute horrific way. The #1 place for rabies today is that part, particularly that part of India, but the Indian subcontinent as a whole. So that's the kind of connection that I was trying to make. And I'm supposed to point this at it. Okay, you saw that. That's pretty cool. So then the question becomes, so I've told you these 3 stories of nature and people and how we still, in this age of man, rely on it. The big question then is, what can we do, right? So I'm going to give you 3 simple things that I think we can do, and just for discussion, then we'll have a little talk about this. So the first thing I think we need to do, and this is in no particular order, is we need to get off our high horses and start working with companies. Because whether you like it or not, consumption sort of drives a lot of things. And how we work with companies makes a big difference. So today, I heard a great story, and I put that in last minute. I heard a great story about the Aspen ski company, who takes methane that comes off of already existing coal mines, and then burns it in order to produce electricity. So they're offsetting it in 2 ways. One, that methane is going to escape anyway, so they're burning it. And the second is, they don't have to actually go buy new power. So, it's clever, it's innovative, but we have to do that, right? Because there's no other way to get, whether it's fishing, whether it's energy, whether it's soft drinks, right? So here, if you want to sell to a world of 7 billion people, and you're a big company like Coca-Cola, then you really have to now start worrying about sustainability. In the old days, it was just the brand. It was Patagonia, it was the small brands who wanted to differentiate themselves in a crowded marketplace. But today, if you want to be global, then you have to think about availability. And you, as consumers, as people who work in companies, have an enormous amount of power to alter things and make that link happen. The second thing we need to do is we need to remember that the people who are most disenfranchised in our communities, they're the ones who need nature even more than we do. It's easy to think about aid and giving development assistance as just something you do for people. But if you really think about it, it really ultimately connects to nature. So whether it's where you get your food from, where you get your fuel wood from, right? A quarter of the world gets its fuel wood from trees. Or where you get your water from. A few years ago, the United States gave out this Millennium Challenge grant to Tanzania, $300 million, actually a little bit more than that. All of it went for pipes and taps. And not a cent went for watersheds. And think about it. Think about how many pipes and taps you've seen in Africa that when you open that tap, nothing comes out of it, right? So ultimately, you forget that water, ultimately, for the poorest people, really does come directly from nature. There's no replacement for that. Or fish. Half the fishers in all the Pacific are actually women. So when fish stocks go down, it's the women who suffer the most. Or to just play, to enjoy. This is in Bangladesh, actually. So you really realize that for the 1 billion who live on that less than $1 a day, nature is absolutely indispensable to their lives. And then the last thing I would say is how we interpret nature or how we introduce nature to our kids. Boy, this is giving me trouble here. I've told this story before, but this is my niece, and she is fanatical about nature, but she's also fanatical about her iPad. And she does not understand that when you go for a walk in the forest, you leave your electronics behind. And I've fought this battle. My sisters fought this battle, and we've given up. But we gave it up, and we embraced it. We said, look, if that's the way she wants to learn, then so be it. Then let's figure out a way to be creative about that, right? So if you live in China, you live in an urban city, you don't have exposure to nature the way we might have. But you have a technology, you have a pipeline that's completely built. And we just need to make sure that what we're getting out there is useful content. And this is one little effort that we made. ACES obviously does a lot of work in this space. We have a program that works on environmental leadership for kids called LEAF. But we also have this program called Nature Works Everywhere. It's one of the things I'm actually most proud of at the Nature Conservancy, what we've done. But it's a way of providing really great, smart, cool content to kids in their classrooms. This is for middle school, for free, through a digital platform. It's got interactive videos and very high quality videos. It's got games, and it's got activation. So once they learn how to think about a pollinator garden, they can actually ultimately go build one. And this work was supported by the Mortgage Family Foundation, and it's become really something that I can see can be scaled up. We can reach millions of kids for very, very little money. For a quarter, I can add another kid to the network, sort of idea. Okay. So those are my three big ideas that I have in terms of moving this dialogue forward. Nature, even in this age of man, is still important to us. It has enormous power, and it's crucial to our lives, often in these really surprising ways. Who would have thought restoring a lake could help reduce HIV? Who would have guessed that the loss of vultures would have brought about the rise of rabies, right? So it does have power even today. And if you want to tackle it, then we got to focus on industry, who they are, what they are, how they engage, how they think about sustainability. We got to focus on the 1 billion who need nature far more to some extent than we do. And we've got to focus on kids. And that's it. And just want to thank some of the folks here. Oh, sure.
We're going to do 15 minutes of Q&A. And we've got ACES staff going around with microphones. I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions, and then we'll get the mics out to everybody. Shall we sit?
Great, let's do that. This Coca-Cola brought to you by a watershed in Latin America. I'm not paid by them. I only drink Coke when I go on stage. It's the only time you'll catch me. Usually it has a little rum in it.
You know, I'll start the questions off. I harken back to the David Letterman interview where he asked you that, isn't it too late to solve climate change? What can we do about it? Is it too, and he was very, very skeptical. I was surprised. And you at one point mentioned governments don't lead, people lead. And, you know, as a country as a whole, we're failing. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on solutions to climate change that, I don't know, with your broad experience, what have you seen?
I mean, you know, I'm not the climate change expert, but I'm working on a film for Showtime right now that asks me to go and meet scientists who really are experts in this field. And I think they will all tell you that there is still a window, but the window is closing fast. It's like a freight train that's barreling down on us. And there is light at the end of the tunnel, and the question is, do you get there fast enough? You know, we know pretty clearly that even if we stop all emissions now, we'll still have to deal with massive change and adaptation that we would have to do on coastlines, on how we manage forests, on how we manage rangelands, and how we manage water, how we manage ski slopes, frankly. So adaptation is absolutely going to be part of our lives, our generation's lives, my life, certainly your kids' lives. The second piece is the emissions piece, and there's such great evidence that, you know, points to the longer you wait, the far more expensive it becomes to deal with. So the question is, we are going to deal with it. It's a question of when. I was with Michael Mann, you know, Michael Mann of the hockey stick fame, and I was actually in Vegas with him For all the places to meet Michael Mann, Vegas. And we actually walked down to a craps table and we're like throwing dice. And I asked him, would any booker here in Vegas ever take a bet against climate change? He's like, no way, you couldn't get the odds. So the people in the know. It's just there's this astonishing amount of delay because no one sort of wants to stick their heads up and says, fine, I'll be the first one to make that sacrifice. And it is a vexing question because it is, look, what's the greatest fear I have is not never uncovering the truth. The greatest fear I have is uncovering the truth and not being able to convince other people of it. It's the Cassandra sort of idea, right? And that's what it is with climate change. We have all the tools we need right now at our disposal. And it is a question of if people lead, then governments will belatedly follow.
Thank you. Let me shift to a subject that's near and dear to everybody in this room, our forests of the West. Mm-hmm. I know you've reported a lot on that. ACES is doing work on a forest health index, which is a watershed-wide grade of the health of our forest. We're also working on a future forest distribution model, a predictive model to show the world a Google exposure, visualization of what the forest might look like in 10, 20, 50, 100 years, given climate change, drought, et cetera. And we've got this amazing wildfire season that's exploded. Yeah. I mean, I guess two questions. What have you seen on a global level related to forests that maybe we can learn from? And I don't know if you have any comments on the West's forests that you've seen.
You guys all know what the Western forests are dealing with in terms of temperature regimes, pine bark beetle infestation, mountain pine bark beetle infestation, and changes in precipitation. So less snow, less rainfall, drier forests, mega fires. We're losing forests in this decade, 50% more than we did in the past 4 decades behind that. And yet our ability to actually manage our forests has become less, simply for 2 reasons. One is less money is going into Interior Department, U.S. Forest Service to manage these forests. Give you an example, last year, 2012 or 2011, we focused on about 1.87 million acres of forest. Last year, we focused on about 600,000 acres of forest. So we just don't have the money to go out and manage these forests. The other thing is that the cost of fighting these forests have become astronomical because people are putting their homes at risk because there are more people out there and so on and so forth. And when I say that, I don't know the exact numbers, but this is very close to being right. 20 years ago, I bet the Forest Service's budget for fighting forest fires was probably somewhere between 10 and 15%. I bet about 13%. Today, it's 40%. So imagine you're an institution, you're the U.S. Forest Service, 40% of your budget to going to fight fires. How are you going to manage? What do you have to manage? So we have to figure out how to open up. It creates jobs. It makes complete sense. We need to be proactive about managing our forests because they are in a period of change. So leaving them alone is not really much of an option. So there is some positive signs on that, but it is a huge challenge. Hey, by the way, I just wanted to mention, President Obama's recent sort of pronouncement and his speech on climate change was encouraging. I think a lot of environmentalists did cheer and say, look, it is a stand. He is asking for divestment in coal, particularly outside the United States. The World Bank followed suit and said no more funding of coal-fired plants outside. There was talk of emissions. There was talk of funding for alternate energy. So that really did make sense. Then, of course, he went to Africa and he pledged, I think, a few $100 million, $300 million for Powering Africa, this initiative to bring electricity into Africa, which a lot of people need. But I was a little bit upset because I didn't hear. They might have been. I just didn't hear much talk about sustainability there. Kenya, for example, by 2025 has pledged to be completely renewable. Completely renewable. Kenya. From geothermal, hydro, solar, and wind. By 2025, the entire country. That's pretty incredible, right? So I was thinking, look, take a page from the birthplace of his dad and, use that same philosophy for that grant to the rest of Africa.
What is, in your opinion, what's Obama's biggest environmental failure?
Jeez.
Does that anything come to mind? I mean, he's the guy, the environmental community voted him in. We wanted him.
Yeah, it's
Is he
tricky.
delivering?
It's difficult. You know, I mean, it's very difficult to pin anything on any one person. I mean, this is us. I mean, this is us. You know, it's what we want. What do we go talk to our legislators about? If we push, it happens. If we push hard enough, it happens. And you know that is true because all sorts of insane things happen because a small number of people push for it and they get it. You know, how do we manage to sell sneakers that are like $200? How do we do that? Well, you know, you could do this. So let me rephrase this. I think that he has a real chance on climate. You know, it is a legacy issue. And I think that if he really pushes that, just that one, someone has to bite the bullet and do it. They're not going to be popular for a decade. And then there'll be an amazing rehabilitation of that person as this incredible force. And all these great presidents, in their time, they always had these challenges. They were never popular in their time. You look at Roosevelt and how much he dragged his feet about getting into World War II. Or even Lincoln. I mean, you go back and you'll see this over and over again in history, in American history. So I think climate is his big issue, and let's see how he does.
Well, and I think communicating, I'm going to say cost, but it's really the savings of mitigating climate. I mean, I draw power with solar panels, and everyone thinks it costs a ton of money, and it's just saving me money, and nobody is doing the math, essentially. Sure. So there's a huge communication gap in varying constituencies.
There is. But I mean, there is, and I think in the end it will be net gain. It will create more jobs. It'll allow the U.S. to be a leader again, rather than ceding that space to China. But there will be people in this country who will be hurt by it. And those are real people. You go to West Virginia, there will be people who will be hurt by it. And, you know, we just can't forget that. That's sort of my only.
Can we move to some questions from the audience? I know we have 2 microphones coming in the back. Raise your hand right here. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been in your wonderful country. I've also been in all the countries you've talked about. I'm Canadian. I'm lucky because we have more natural resources that are sustainable. 2 questions. I was on Lake Malawi 15 years ago, and it didn't look at all like that. When I went snorkeling there was no garbage. There was nothing on the bottom of that lake, and there was no problem around the edges. My other question is, what about the Arctic? The Antarctic is protected. The Arctic is not protected, and it's becoming a major, major problem. And United States and Canada are 2 of the 6 countries that control the Arctic, but no one protects it.
So one thing, Lake Malawi, at least the parts that I was in, is still surprisingly trash-free. So you don't actually see a lot of plastic bottles and refuse and stuff like that. Most of those villages are so poor that even a plastic bottle is a resource still. So I don't know when that'll tip, but it is very, very clean generally, pretty nice on the surface. But the fisheries pressure is enormous, mostly because so many refugees have come over the lake from other countries, and because farming practices are so poor that, you know, it's pushed a lot of protein production into the water. So I think there's a lot of hope in Lake Malawi still. I really think that now that we know this link, there are groups, including the Nature Conservancy and others, Pathfinder, who are working, Frankfurt Zoological in Tanzania, on Lake Tanganyika, very similar situation, to work on this sort of problem. So I do see sort of some sign there. Arctic, you know, you know the challenge better than I do. I mean, you're absolutely right. Right now, it's a scramble for resources, so no one's really going to give much. Most of that Arctic sea ice will be gone. They'll be gone probably certainly in the next 10 years. There'll be an ice-free Arctic. What does that mean? It means that for humans, it'll be a big disruption in the jet stream. And because now the jet stream has lots of room to go back and forth, it means unpredictability in our weather systems. People ask about polar bears. I genuinely don't think polar bears will be extinct. No doubt decline in numbers, but there are places that they can still live and hunt. But extinction's a pretty high threshold.
Next question.
God, I wish I had some really good news here.
Rick?
Stop lying.
Rick Keaty here.
Thanks for your work and your stories. You have a wonderful way of connecting us to the value of nature and the critical value of nature. I work in climate change, but my question is more general. You mentioned consumers, consumption, and working with corporations. I'm not so sure that corporations by themselves will take sustainability far enough. How can we connect consumers to put pressure and hold corporations more accountable than they would be by themselves to behave better in our behalf?
Okay. So you're absolutely right. I don't expect companies just all of a sudden to just decide they're going to do this. Some of the big ones are taking this seriously, but it is really self-serving. It is because of natural resources. If you're, Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Saab Miller, you need water for bottling, and you need a lot of water. And so you really do have to worry about the watershed you're getting water from. And you can create very clever mechanisms to offset protection of watersheds by how much water they use, like these water funds that have been created in Latin America and now in Africa too. But if I was to think of, so obviously consumers can play a role, and you guys all can choose with your dollars who you spend that money for and all of that. But if there was one thing I could think about that I would love to see is, every major corporation now, pretty much everyone, produces a corporate environmental sustainability report. If you look at those, they are hugely varying in quality. Right? Some of them are just pamphlets of we did great, next year we're doing greater. Some of them go into some depth and some real detail of it. If we could get some kind of system in place to create a standardization around certain metrics of corporate sustainability that all companies voluntarily, is fine, will report to, then you have some way of comparing across apples and oranges. And that will give consumers and investors enormous amount of power. Because right now it's difficult to know. I'd love to see that happen. I think there's some move underfoot to try and make it happen. But it's one of those things that smart foundations and smart institutes could put like the one we're sitting in, could put some real muscle around. How do you create a corporate sustainable report that A, is believable, and how do you get that model to be replicated by other companies?
Another question, Tom?
Thanks. Hi, Sanjayan.
Good to see you.
My question for you is philosophical, but it's also got a very practical edge. And that is, first of all, congratulations on everything you're doing. This is really important. There are human beings in those pictures. And now, thanks to you, it's a lot more clear how everything does impact and affect human beings. And it's hugely important. It's going to drive a lot of resources into the kind of conservation that we all want to see. My question for you is, there is a tipping point where if you are completely man-centered in thinking about nature, you think about only the value of species or places only in terms of how they affect people, and you suddenly miss a tremendous amount of the great variety and beauty and inspiration that we all hold dear in nature, that doesn't happen to directly today, in a way we understand at this moment, impact people. And so the question is, in this pursuit of yours, how do you avoid tipping into that arrogance that can come from too much man-centeredness and thereby missing not just species we care about, places we care about, but also that sense of real, true humility and oneness with nature that's valuable?
Good question, Tom. So for me personally, that's not a hard thing. And it's because at the end of the day, you kind of have to be true to yourself. And for me, I'm unabashedly in love with nature. I live in Montana because I like going for a walk in the woods when something bigger than me might be out to kill me. That just gets me excited. But it doesn't work for a lot of people around the world. Come for a walk, it might kill you. It's just not a great selling point. Like, I've tried, right? So I think the first thing is you should never apologize for why you care about nature. If you care about nature because it gives you clean water, then good for you. But if you care about nature because you just love seeing hummingbirds in your backyard, then good for you too. And, that's really important. Just because we sell conservation in the Anthropocene doesn't mean that we don't also love the Holocene. And that should be okay. So personally, it's an easy one for me to do it. Now, I know what you're getting at. You're getting at the broader sort of conservation community or the environmental community. And I see most of these things like pendulums, that, look, if we can create a very big tent and we can get people from all walks of life to be part of it, then I'm for it. I would rather have a movement than a niche. And right now, we have a niche. And if we are going to truly have a movement, then we're going to have to be okay sharing this tent with people who are doing it for very self-serving reasons, or doing it because they can put a dollar amount on this service, and it makes sense in their spreadsheet, and that means shareholder profits go up. Okay, fine, come on in. But, I've struggled, right? Because, look, I would love to be just talking to people who are like myself. But the challenge of our jobs is to go talk to people who are not like ourselves. And if the start is water and let's create a water fund, maybe I can get them there and they'll also see a condor and go, wow, that's pretty cool. And when they come back to their kids, they're not talking about water funds. They're going to talk about the condor.
One more question. I think we have time. Right there. I'm pointing at you, and you're up front, so you got the mic.
Thank you very much. Sanjay, thank you so much for being here. What you shared was epic, outstanding, and inspiring. I'll make it as brief as I possibly can. I've done some investigation and just some traveling and interviewing about green issues over a number of years. And one of the greatest challenges that I've seen is changing human values. Changing the values of people needing to understand that we need to, in our lifetime, make sacrifices so that people in many, many more lifetimes need to be able to live sustainably on this planet. How do you foresee us being able to change values where people make changes and sacrifices that are necessary for future generations to be able to live sustainably on this planet and for this planet to be able to sustain itself?
That's a fantastic question. And it's not a question I can hope to answer. It's a question really to think about. And it's always a dialogue. I think it will always be a dialogue. The way I think about it is that, when you look at humans on this planet, we are, virtually all of us, in virtually every continent and nearly every country, are better off today than we were 200 years ago. There's absolutely no doubt. You can measure this on almost every index, right? Healthcare, women's rights, education, longevity, everything. Think about it. 200 years ago, basically, the world was dirt poor, and it didn't matter whether you were in England or India, you were about the same poor, and then there were very few rich people. It was basically that. And you didn't live very long. Someone like me, we wouldn't have made it, certainly 1,000 years ago I wouldn't have made it, right? I've got bad eyes, I hobble when I walk, and so on and so forth. So we are all better off, and in every continent people have been better off. Except in one measure. And that is the sort of measure about happiness and contentment. And there's just very soft evidence on that. It's funny because everything else we can track really well, and we can be pretty sure that we're living longer today, infinitely longer, times longer today than we were, 200 years ago. But are we 3 times more content? Are we 3 times more happy? That I'm pretty sure is not. Now, there's no doubt that rising incomes do contribute to happiness and a sense of security and well-being. But look, I personally make 20 times more money than I made when I was a grad student. I am not 20 times happier than when I was a grad student. Those were the happiest days of my life. And you guys know this, right? You guys all know this. So I think this philosophical question you're asking is a fantastic one, because it ultimately comes to how do we decouple contentment from the pursuit of material goods. And I'm just as guilty of that as anyone is. And it just scales. Doesn't matter how really rich or poor you are, it scales. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sanjayan. Thank you for coming.